Good afternoon again, and welcome to Dapsy Chess. It's a very cold, rainy day in Washington, D.C., and I have a game I want to show us today, which is the game that was played between the two teams, Black Knights, which I represent, against the Coral Reef. This game actually happened this past Friday at the DC Chess League. But before I get into the game, I want to send a very deep condolence to all the people that was involved at the plane crash at the Ronald Reagan Airport. I think there was a plane crash between I think an American airline and an helicopter. The plane was pretty much just seconds away from landing, and unfortunately, this collision happened. I'm sure there's still going to be a lot of investigation. We actually have absolutely no idea how this could have been. Such a sad situation, very very sad. Our hearts and condolences goes out to all the families that were involved in this very bad plane crash. Okay, so let's get back into the game that I have for you today. Like I said, this is the game that was played in the fourth round of the DC Chess League um, between the Black Knight and the Coral Reef. I was playing on board two for the Black Knights. I was playing against international master Eugene Meyer, a great personality, a figure that has been present in DC chess, Virginia chess for a very, very long time. An amazing gentleman. So let us get right into it. So I actually was on the black side of a King's Indian attack. Interestingly, I've never actually seen this line that was played by my opponent. But let us get right into it. So knight f3 was played, d5, g3, knight goes to f6, bishop to g2, bishop to f5. Of course, I want to move my bishop to f5 before moving the pawn to e6 so that I don't have a bad bishop on c8. A lot of people pretty much freaks out with the idea of having their bishop stuck on the c8 square. So bishop f5 is played, castles, e6, d3, h6. This is it's a very normal prophylactic move, and the idea is pretty much to maintain the bishop on this long diagonal. So we're trying to invest the time, a tempo to be able to pull the bishop back to h7 in case there's a knight h4 hitting the bishop. So h6 is played in this position, and knight bd2, bishop to e7, and b3. Like I said, this is a line I personally play myself on the white side. So on the black, playing it on the black side always feels somehow. But yes, so after the move b3, black castles, and now bishop goes to b2. So it's pretty much a double fianchetto that black is playing against. Normally with the double fianchetto, white normally just kind of waits to see the kind of setup black wants to come up with and then try to play according or based on that setup. So at this point in time, I wasn't sure if I want to play c6 yet or I want to play c5 with the idea of knight to c6. I wasn't sure what I want to play yet, but at some point in time, I know I want to make a move like a4, a5, a5, a4, trying to open up the file and trying to use that file at some point. So after the move, bishop to b2, c6 is played. So c6, knight e1. Now, I have never seen the move knight to e1. When I checked this game afterwards, it's actually it's part of theory, but it's not a theory I'm actually familiar with. Knight to e1. Of course, the only idea I think the knight went to e1 is to be able to play the move f4. But I'm like, okay, after knight to e1, where else is this knight going to? So I wasn't really sure about that. So after the move knight to e1, I played a5. Interestingly, this is actually the correct continuation to this setup. Now, like I said earlier, black wants to play a5 and a4. Now, looking at the position, the pieces in the center of the board, everything pretty much looks normal. Nothing much going on. There are no contacts yet. Like I said, that means there are no contact between pieces and pawns or pieces and pieces. Of course, there's space. This is one, but it's not really much something one to really worried about for now. So the idea of a4 is to play a5 and try to open up the a file and just try to create some play on that part of the board. So after a5, e4 is played, getting the tempo on my bishop. So I simply move back all the way to h7 and then a3. Now, the idea of a3 is to make sure that the a file doesn't get opened up. So, for example, after the move a4, which was played in the game, b4 is played. The idea is to keep the position closed as long as possible until white thinks it's a good time for him to open up the position and then make some things happen. So after the move a3, um, a4 is played. A4, b4, c5. I wasn't so sure of this move when I made this move during the game, the move c5. And of course, the idea of is really still to break this pawn chain and then try to get my knight to c6. Okay, if I can get my knight to c6 with the pawn on c5, I have pressure on b4. So c5 is played here, captures, bishop captures back. It plays king h1. Actually, at this point in time, I saw a situation whereby opponent can actually win a pawn. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and takes on d5, take back, bishop takes, and then I just have knight to c6. So what do I have for the big pawn down? Pretty much I have the two bishops. And was it going to be enough? I wasn't really sure. But I didn't know why my opponent didn't do, you know, play that move. So instead, he played king to h1. I guess it was just pretty much stuck on the plan of playing f4 and trying to just roll the pawns in the center of the board. After the move king h1, I played knight b d7, making sure that bishop takes doesn't work because now I have the knight takes. And then if it takes on d5, I have pawn knight takes as well. Of course, you don't want to take with the bishop because after queen takes, apart from the fact your king is in check, you're going to have to suffer on the light squares. So knight b d7 is played. Now he plays f4, makes a very logical sense, trying to gain some space. And of course, that's one of the reasons the king went to h1, because white wants to move the pawn to f4. And of course, that's also the reason why the knight went to e1, to be able to move the f4 pawn. So f4 is played, takes on d5, takes on e4, takes back, queen to c7. The idea of the queen to c7 is to vacate the d square, the d8 square for the rook, to put pressure on the queen on d file. Not just the queen, but just to put pressure on that d file. So queen c7 was played, knight goes to d3. Now the knight gets back into the game with tempo. Of course, you don't want to trade your bishop for a knight right now. Why? Because you're not so sure about what's actually going to happen in the game. Is it going to be an open position where the bishop dominates, or is it going to be a closed position where the knights are um, very dangerous? So bishop goes back to e7, preserving my two bishops. He plays rook to c1. That's of course that's one of the moves I expected because at some point in time my plan was to move the rook to c to put pressure on the pawn on c2. So already I kind of like my position because if you look at the position, black has two pawn chains. This is one right here, all this is connected, and then there's two. But white has three. This is one pawn chain, that's another one, that's another one. Pawn chain, pawn chain. Do I mean pawn chain or pawn island? I actually mean pawn island, not pawn chain. Now, what's the importance of this? When you're playing in a game and you have more pawn islands, it pretty much means you have more things to worry about. So going into an ending, I think this is going to kind of look good for black because it has fewer pawn islands. So after the move rook to c1, rook d8 is played, and then queen to e2 makes a lot of sense. Getting away from the x-ray attack on the d file. Now rook a to c8. Black pretty much bringing all the pieces towards the central square, just putting them all together. And this is one thing I always talk about in my videos. Whenever you place your pieces, you want to make sure they are well placed and they're looking good. Because when your pieces are looking good, good things happen. If you place your pieces and they're not looking good, bad things are going to happen. So rook c8 is played, and then it plays e5. Of course, forcing my knight away from the f6 square. Of course, f6 is a very important square for this knight because of the knight on f6 puts pressure on the central squares. So after the move e5, knight goes to e8. So he plays g4. When he made this move, I thought to myself, this g4 move you're making, if this attack doesn't work, your position is just going to have a number of weaknesses you would have to deal with. And I think that's exactly what happened in this game. Of course, what's the point of g4? Just trying to open up the position and trying to make sure that all the species find something to do concerning the black king. But after the move g4, I played knight to c5. What's the point of knight to c5? Trying to put pressure on the d file. Now I'm putting pressure on this three times. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and I could also have the fourth one. And it's not so much about the D3 knight right now. Also, the knight on D2 is going to have to be looking a little shaky. So I played knight to C5. It plays F5. Of course, the idea is just to open up the position and come get the black king. Here I play bishop to G5. Now, what's the idea of the bishop to G5? I'm pinning the knight to the rook. That means you cannot move the knight because you're going to lose the exchange. And if you move the rook, you're going to have to worry about the pawn on C2. So, bishop to G5, and this is another thing I always say in my videos, improve the placement of your pieces. You develop your pieces are looking good on certain squares. Then you don't just stop there. Try to improve the placement of your pieces. Try to put them where they can actually even do more. So bishop G5 was played. He played rook to C1. What's the point of rook to C1? I wasn't so sure. Probably trying to double the rooks on the F file. That's a possibility. What else? Of course, an extra protection on the knight on D2. I'm not so sure what else. So here, I play rook to D7. The engine actually said I should have played queen to E7. And I think the idea of queen to E7 is, number one, bishop here is possible. Bishop takes is possible, followed by queen to G5. And with the pressure on the D file, black is going to have some pull more than white thinks. And if this game pretty much fizzles out into an ending, black is going to look a little better. Why? Because because white has all these advanced pawns that actually could turn out to be weaknesses. So bishop G5 is played, rook to F2, rook to D7. What's the point of rook to F7, rook to D7? The idea is to double the rooks on the D file, put more pressure on the D file. So after rook to D7, it plays rook C to F1. Now the threat is pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. There's checkmate on F8. So now I have to do something. Excuse me. I have to do something about the threat on F8. And I've said this a lot of time that we have a pawn on F5 and F7 stopping the rooks from getting to F8 is not enough. Anytime there's an X-ray attack, we always have to treat it like a direct attack. Because if we don't, things happen very fast in the game. So at this point, I played bishop takes D2 because now the knight is longer pinned. So think about it. The knight is ready to jump. I don't know if the knight was going to come to C4. I don't know if the knight was going to go to F3, putting pressure on my bishop on G5. I don't know what the knight is going to do. But I wasn't going to give that knight a chance to start jumping around in the game. So bishop takes D2 was played. Queen takes D2. Now I played queen to D8. Now, it's a multi-purpose move. Putting more pressure on the D file, the D knight, and also clearing the C7 square for the knight on E8. Now, if I take this move back and ask you which of the pieces on the board is black's worst placed piece, it's very easy to locate that. That will be the knight on E8. Why? Because it doesn't have a single square to move to. If you have a piece and you do not have a square to move that piece, then that piece is going to cause a lot of trouble for you. So queen to D8, the idea of the queen to D8 is to vacate the C7 square for the knight. Now, where's the knight going from E8? Of course, I'm trying to get to C7, probably to E6 or even to D5. So after the move queen to D8, queen goes to B4. Now, knight C7 doesn't work because I lose a piece on C5. Now, the idea is to put pressure on the knight, pressure on the pawn on A4, and of course, think about it. He also has an extra attack on the F8 square. So I have to be very careful here. Of course, the first thing I did was to take the knight on D3. It takes back, and then I played knight to C7. It's very important for me to vacate the square for my pieces to defend. I don't want just my king to be the only piece defending the F8 square. That would be a very, very, very bad idea for me. So after the move knight to C7, queen takes A4, rook takes D3. It takes on E6. I took back with the pawn. The engine actually said I should have taken back with the knight. But why did I take back with the pawn? I was thinking, even if you come to the F8 square, rook check, queen takes, rook comes back here, rook takes. I like black's position because I have the two rooks. I have a very strong bishop. Your pieces are not so doing a whole lot. Probably the most active pieces white has is the queen on A4, maybe the bishop on G2. But then the king is going to really have to suffer, exactly, especially if I can get a rook on the 7th rank, putting pressure on the bishop on B2, and then trying to get a second rook on the 7th rank. It's going to be a lot difficulties for white to go over. So, but at this point in the game, after f takes, it takes on b7. I go back to b8, bishop to e4. Bishop captures, queen to d5. Now, it's very important for me to exchange off the queen. As long as we have the queens on the board, these pieces can be a lot of pressure. They can be a lot of trouble for the black pieces. But I thought to myself, you know what? Apart from the queen being active, the only active pieces he has are the rooks on the f file. But I'm not really so worried about the rooks because he has the rooks on the f file. I have my rook on the background, keeping an eye on the f5 square. So if I can trade off his queen, he's going to be stuck with a bad bishop. Why is the bad bishop? It's being blocked by his own pawns. So queen d5 is played, queen captures, knight captures. It plays rook to c1. Of course, it's very important for rooks to always go to open files. He has an open file on the f file, but I say, you know what? That's not enough. I need some more open files. So let's go to the c file. Now, what's the point? Rook to c6 would be an idea. Why? To put pressure on the weak pawn on e6. So after the move rook to c1, I played rook d to b3, trying to win the bishop or win the pawn. So at this point, he moved the bishop to d4 and offered me a draw. I thought about it for like 1 minute, or I thought about it for about a minute, and I said, you know, I really want to play on. And now this is the reason why I wanted to play on. Now, even after losing the pawn, he's going to still have to be worried about the pawn on d4 and the pawn on g4. And also another thing I thought to myself is, in a position like this where plays on one side of the board, you know, the knights are always better because when it comes to close combat, the knights are deadly. But when it comes to play on both sides of the board, then the bishops are deadly. So in this situation, I felt after winning the pawn on a3, all the plays on the king's side, I think I'll take my chances. I think I'll push and see what happens. So bishop d4 is played. Rook takes a3. It plays rook to c2. What's the point? Try and trade pieces. So the idea is to place the rook to c8. Of course, I ignored it and played rook to a4. Now, if you come to c8, I'm going to take. You're going to take back check. I'm going to move my king to h7. You're going to have to find a way to defend your bishop. I don't know where you're going to move. If you move your bishop right there, rook takes this, you've down the pawn. You know, this pawn doesn't look so good. Your king doesn't look so good. And this is just better for black. So after the move rook to c2, I pretty much attack the bishop on d4. If the bishop moves, he loses the pawn on g4. So he said, you know what, I'm going to defend my bishop. I said, I'm going to put more pressure on your bishop. He said, well, I'm going to keep defending our bishop. So right now, these rooks are defending the bishop. My rooks are attacking the bishop. Meanwhile, my knight has several things the knight can do. Pretty much the bishop in this position is a big liability for white because you would have to defend the bishop. Instead of the bishop trying to create some attacking chances, you're just actually sitting there trying to defend the pawn on e5. So king h7 is played. It plays king to g2, knight check, king goes to f3, g5. Make sure this knight stays on the f4 square. He plays king to e4, staying in the pin. This just doesn't look good for black. Now you cannot move the bishop, you cannot move the rook, you cannot move your other rook. If you move your king, okay, that's all right, but you still have to worry about the bishop on d4. Meanwhile, black has the luxury of just finding squares to move his knight. Like I said earlier, when it comes to close combat, knights are very deadly. So at this point, I played knight to d5, started creating threats. What's the threat? Knight c3 check, winning an exchange. He said, well, that's not going to happen. He plays rook to c1. I said, well, I'm going to play rook to b3. What am I threatening? Rook e3 will be a checkmate. He said, you know, I still don't want that to happen. You know, that's not going to happen. So now, pretty much the pieces are tied to defending. So I decided to start attacking more weak points in this territory. And of course, if you look at this position, the pawn on g4 is weak, the pawn on h2 is weak. So which of them can I attack? Of course, the one on h2. I move the rook to b2, attacking the pawn on h2. Now I have I have two threats here. My threat is not just to take the pawn, but to come to the square f2 and then checkmate on f4. So at this point, he says, I'm going to come and attack your pawn on c6. So that means if I decide to still come along here with the threat of mate, he simply takes my pawn on e6. And after the check here, he simply takes my knight on d5. And now I'm just losing. So at this point, I said, you know what? After the move rook b2, he plays rook to c6. I move the knight back to f4. defending my weakness, still threatening to take his pawn on h2. So he plays rook to d1. He has to do something. And it's so sad that this bishop cannot move thanks to the rook on a4. So after the move rook to d1, I snap the pawn off the board. And then he plays rook to b1. What is it threatening? The threat is check, king goes to g6. The rook comes down to b7, threatening check, and that will be mate. But you know what? Black has the move first. So I play rook to e2 check, and at this point, he plays king f3, rook takes d4, and mate cannot be avoided if he decides to go for his mate 3. Now he's just down a piece. So the only way to stop the checkmate that is threatened on d3 is to move a rook to either the b3 square or the c3 square. But then you would have been the pawn down and the bishop down, which is still a lost position. So at this point in the game, my opponent resigned, and I was able to win this game. I would say, you know, and we actually had a game, I think sometimes last year, where he also had the white pieces, and I was actually better, I mean, almost winning. But I just got a little careless. I played a little faster than normal, and I ended up throwing that game away, meaning I was able to draw the game. So when he offered me a draw in this game, I just said, I'm going to take my time, see what I can get from this game. Okay, that's it for today. And I know the Tata Steel tournament is still going on. I am going to try to do some videos on some of the games in that tournament. Probably trying to check out some of the games that's been playing in the challenges section. Okay, that's it for today once again, and I want you all to take care. Have a nice weekend. God bless, and see you soon. Bye for now.